deciding how to share this, but she had all the letters. I have all these legal documents. I never got to tell my story because it like broke the ice with everything where people were saying, oh, she's not Native American. And then it became a big fight between people. What happened here was that our family drama, the tribal nation got drug into our family drama. We've been dealing and cleaning up her messes for years. This is nothing new. This is on a national scale.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's, it's interesting and why it's a fascinating split between, the national story of your sister and the personal story, which is that, you might expect if it was just a case of cut and dry, you guys kind of had a normal, family life and you maybe weren't in touch with her, but she was off doing her thing and you knew the truth and she was not playing this character and whatever. But obviously for you and for your mother and your sister and everybody involved, like the dealing with her was really not at all about the character and the, the publicity and the culture. It was like she was a mentally ill, essentially criminal who was making your life and your family's life really, really hard. And so for you, it's like, who cares about, I would imagine, I'm sure you obviously are empathetic to the tribal nations when it comes to that stuff, but for you, it was like ultra personal. Yeah. But yeah. So through the years then, were you like, as this was going on, did it ever occur to you? I'm sure you were just kind of trying to, obviously you were fighting this legally and then fighting it privately and trying to deal with this. At that point, were you like, I gotta get this out into the media, to the press to help me? Or was that sort of still far off?
No, that wasn't even, see, you have to understand, Sacheen Littlefeather is a character. Okay. That's a character that she plays when the camera's on, the powwows are going, the Brando thing. We're not enmeshed in any of that. We're dealing with this person that is mentally unstable. Now she's got mom. That was my battle with her for 3 years, to the point where, ironically, one day I went to ER. There was a gal that, I don't know, I found her. I just happened to run across her. She was overdosing. And so we called the ambulance, a couple of us, and they picked her up and they took her to Marin County General Hospital. So I just happened to show up 4 hours later, and I recognized my sister's car. I went in there and I saw my mom, and my other sister was there. And she, she was all beat up in a fetal position in ER.
Oh, God. Wow.
And I went in and I go, Mama, it's me. And she calls me Rosie. She goes, Rosie? And I said, yes. I said, God sent me. She goes, I knew he would. And my other sister had walked out of the room, Trudy, and I went up to Sacheen and I said, this is a spiritual death. This is a violation of the universe. This is a murder. And I said, and it's the last thing I do. I said, I'm going to expose you for the mentally ill fraud and this fake Indian that you're portraying. This is wrong. And she just looked at me and you could just see her melting. I said, may God have mercy on your soul. So Mom, after that point, I stayed with her. We were separated 3 years through the hand of Sacheen and Chuck, who didn't answer the door, who defied the police. The police back then weren't very good on elder abuse. And Mom died 3 weeks later. Sacheen stopped me from going to the funeral. She told my middle sister that I didn't want to come, when I had cut off all communication with her when this first started in 2006. I was trying to expose her to social services and the police and things like that. I hadn't taken it to this level. So when my mother died, I didn't get to go to the funeral. I didn't get to go to the rosary. That was all Sacheen's making, because she hated me, because I turned her in and I threatened her to life and I jeopardized her scam. She was scamming the state of California. Right. She signed herself up as an in-home health care person to, I don't know, two people or too many. I don't know. She was collecting all sorts of money. Let's just put it that way. Using people's social security numbers. Yeah. I mean, she was a scammer. She knew the system and she worked it well. She also worked a lot of people well because she duped people, including Hollywood. So when Mom died, I just let it go. I just said, I don't want anything to do with her anyway. That was the only bond, was trying to get my mom away from her, like anybody would. And the majority of elder abuse it takes on today is family, is the high percentage rate. And then you've got nursing homes. So,
and to really quickly back up, when you went in and you saw that your mother was physically hurt, was it obviously? It sounds like it was your immediate assumption that Sacheen had literally done this. Is that accurate?
Correct. I know that for a fact because my other sister was running her own business. She didn't have time for that. My mother was so bent over like this, she couldn't even pick her head up. It was terrifying. Not only that, my sister had driven her insane to a point I have never seen in my life. And that is not an understatement. In fact, when I was in the hospital visiting her and I would take a couple steps back, she goes, "Oh, don't fall back that way. You're going to fall off this giant cliff." And she'd say, and then we tried to get her up out of the hospital bed to walk. And she couldn't walk because my sister had left her for hours and hours. And when I was taking care of my mom, she goes, "Sacheen will leave me alone for hours and hours." And my sister was a shopaholic. So her whole apartment was like a Tweakerville. You just had these little places. Well, when you got an elder who has dementia, their sight's not that good. Their hearing's not that good. And when she had some Parkinson's, they shuffle their feet. So you have to have an open area to take care of them. My sister abused her. That's what this is all about. So now I leave California. I moved to Montana and I'm thinking this whole thing's in God's hands. I wanted it to happen then. I have no idea now that she's taking this to a whole different level. She tried to find out after that happened where I was working, to try to keep a control or some kind of tab on me, but she couldn't. So now I'm moving in Montana and I'm living here. My roommate says to me, after a year later, I said, "Yeah, this is my sister, what have you." He says, "Well, I grew up with tribal people all my life because I live on the reservation out here in Montana. I live on the Salish Kootenai Pondere Reservation. I've got tribal people all around me. In fact, we and two others are the only white people that have land that's not tribal. If I walk 500 feet over here, I'm on the res. They want their land back. I probably could go to the tribe and say, buy my house, and they'd buy it. But, with that said, he said, "Well, why don't you apply to the tribe?" I go, "Apply to the tribe? What are you talking about?" So he explains it to me. And I said, "Well, I don't know. I guess, she's supposed to say that we're White Mountain Apache and that she's got Yaqui thrown out there." I wouldn't even know where to begin. So he starts telling me, well, this is what they do, because he's grown up with them all his life, but he's white. So I go to, I get a hold of this gal by the name of Leanne Mello at White Mountain Apache and says, "I'd like to apply, blah, 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 who are you related to?" And so we go through this months of her trying to figure out if there's something there. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. I went on the internet to search if there was something. There was absolutely nothing. Now, this started in November of 2021. Now we go into February of 2022, and she says there's nothing there, period. I'm like, okay, thank you.
So wait, you were doing that, was this sort of, obviously you knew your heritage growing up, but was it sort of at this point going like, maybe I should just triple check to make sure we don't really randomly have this heritage? Yeah. So you just wanted to, before you were publicly saying this is not true, you said, might as well cover my bases and really make sure.
Right. Only because my roommate had brought it up to me and he says, "Do you know if you're tribal that you are entitled to certain benefits?" I go, "Really? I didn't know that."
Interesting.
That's the reason I did it. That's the reason
gotcha.
I did
Okay,
it.
gotcha.
And that's the reason a lot of people will do it and they lie and say they're tribal. I, on the other hand, after listening to my sister for decades, thought, is there something here that I don't know? But I couldn't find anything on her that said what tribe. And I said, I'm going to take this to the next level. Well, White Mountain Apache had never heard of her. And I sent him a picture of her. I go, Leanne Mallow, you've never, no, don't know anything about her. They said, okay. So my sister's alive then. Now, all this time, we got 8 more months now. And I kept looking her up on the internet because she has breast cancer, wondering when she was going to die. Sorry, people. I don't like her. She's a very sick, evil person. She needed to go. And my sister is somebody that she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2011. We ironically happened to have the same practitioner, Sherry Forrester, who I can't stand, for good reason. My sister and I weren't talking, but at that time, Dr. Forrester says, I want you to have a breast exam. I said, why? She goes, because your sister's got breast cancer. I said, really? What stage? Like 4, maybe, and she said, well, you two still not talking? And I said, no. She goes, well, then I can't tell you anything more about your condition. I said, you're not making any sense here. So anyway, I knew my sister. I said, I know her. She's going to drag this out for about 10 years until she drops dead, most likely. And she did. She died in, 2022. So I put her right on track. So as things go on, I had heard something on the internet where they were going to give her this big apology, because now she's created the saint. See, I don't know. I don't really check in with her. I washed my hands of her when I left California. And now are we really going to give her this big apology because her career was ruined? I'm like, oh my goodness. I was out of the picture. So she wasn't worried about me anymore. And my other sister, Trudy, she cut her off 2 years before because she was creating this enigma, this saint, this someone who sacrificed herself for Native Americans. We had absolutely no idea what was going on. Absolutely nothing. And so, with that said, then my girlfriend, Teresa, came over here, texts me and says, oh, I'm sorry. I heard on the news that your sister died. I'm thinking to myself, she texts me. I'm like, really? So I get on the internet and I read where she had died in Nevada at home, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, and her niece, Kalina Lawrence. I'm like, what? Who's Kalina Lawrence? So Kalina Lawrence is this Native American woman that my sister had signed up, I believe, for in-home health care, and she was getting money. Some other woman was there, I think, that signed herself up for it. And this girl is going around saying she's her niece.